Chapter 1. The Face of Deception, Expanded. John Edward Robinson appeared, to everyone who knew him, as an ordinary man, a businessman, a neighbor, a husband, and a father. Polite in conversation, quiet in demeanor, the kind of man you might nod to on a suburban street without giving him a second thought. But behind that ordinary mask lurked a predator who carefully orchestrated every step of his double life. Online, he was Slave Master, a name that would later strike terror into anyone who followed the case. On the surface, he was a man of trust and professionalism. Behind closed doors, he was meticulous, calculating, and deadly. Robinson had a talent for making people feel safe. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, they all saw the same smiling man, the one who shook hands, attended local events, and blended seamlessly into his community. But while the world saw ordinary routines, he was building an empire of control, manipulating lives in ways that were nearly invisible. Every gesture, every smile, every word was part of a performance. He measured reactions, studied weaknesses, and chose his targets with precision. To the untrained eye, he was simply polite, helpful, and unassuming. To those he lured online, he was the embodiment of danger dressed in calm familiarity. In this chapter, we explore the mask, the face he presented to the world, and the personality he hid behind. How could one man live two lives so diametrically opposed? How could someone so normal harbor such darkness? These questions haunted investigators, neighbors, and eventually, the families of his victims. The calm suburban streets and the mundane office spaces he inhabited were the perfect camouflage. And for years, Robinson walked unnoticed, undetected, and unfathomably free. But as the stories of missing women began to accumulate, the world would slowly realize that the mask of normalcy was not just a disguise, it was a trap. Chapter 2. The Lure of the Web. The Internet was John Edward Robinson's hunting ground long before social media made connections instant and global. In the early days of chat rooms, online forums, and personal ads, he found the perfect way to reach vulnerable targets, people searching for opportunity, companionship, or connection. To the outside world, these were harmless interactions, a job offer, a friendly conversation, a message offering guidance. But every word Robinson typed, every image he shared, every promise he made was carefully crafted. It wasn't random, it was calculated, methodical, a trap set with precision. Victims believed they were finding help or friendship. They didn't know they were stepping into a carefully constructed web where trust was weaponized. Robinson studied them, learned their fears and desires, and used that knowledge to manipulate, control, and isolate them. Even in the early hours of digital messaging, before smartphones and instant notifications, Robinson's skill at building trust and exploiting vulnerability was remarkable. Each message seemed harmless, each online interaction a chance for connection. But hidden beneath those simple exchanges was a sinister strategy designed to lure them closer to his world of control. The web wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a hunting ground, a stage for deception, and a bridge into the lives of unsuspecting victims. And every person who responded unknowingly stepped closer into the shadows of the slave master, into a story of manipulation and terror that would eventually shock a nation. Chapter 3. Contracts of Control. John Edward Robinson's methods went beyond charm and digital luring. He used contracts, carefully worded documents that promised jobs, money, or other opportunities. On paper, they seemed legitimate, official, binding, even mundane. But to his victims, they were anything but harmless. These contracts weren't just papers, they were psychological chains. Signing wasn't merely agreement, it was submission, a first step into the control he meticulously designed. Each clause, each promise, each line was crafted to manipulate, to make the victims believe they had a choice when, in reality, the path had already been decided. Robinson understood human nature. He knew how to make people feel comfortable, how to exploit hope and trust. The contracts were a tool to deepen that control, a method to bind victims emotionally and mentally before the physical horrors even began. To the victims, these agreements seemed like opportunity, a step toward a better life, a helping hand, or a partnership. But Robinson had no intention of honoring them. Every signature was another thread in the web, a connection that pulled them closer to a reality they could not escape. Investigators would later call these documents a signature of his crimes, elegant, calculated, and terrifying in their simplicity. They weren't just legal instruments, they were the blueprint of control, a chilling reminder of how deception could be made to feel official, legitimate, and utterly convincing. Chapter 3b. Paper Walls to Brick Walls. John Edward Robinson showed us how contracts could become chains. He didn't need a gun, a dungeon, or even a raised voice. His weapon was paperwork. Signatures on promises that were never real, documents that stripped away freedom in black and white ink. It was control by contract, power disguised as opportunity. Robinson made the pen his trap, and the people who trusted him walked right into cages they couldn't see until it was too late. But Robinson wasn't the first to think this way. Long before he sharpened his pen, there was a man who sharpened something else: blueprints. In the late 1800s, Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as H.H. Holmes, built his legend not on paper contracts, but on walls, hallways, and hidden doors. Where Robinson manipulated trust through documents, Holmes manipulated reality itself, constructing a building that became a maze of fear. It's the same pattern dressed in different clothes. Robinson used leases, business agreements, and fake promises of employment to get people under his thumb. Holmes used construction plans, secret rooms, and architectural trickery to do the same. Both men designed systems of control. Both men turned ordinary objects, a contract, a staircase, a locked door, into invisible shackles. The lesson is chilling. The tools may change, but the mindset doesn't. Whether it S. Robinson S. contracts in the 20th century or Holmes walls in the 19th, the goal was identical: domination without resistance, power without question. That's the thread connecting them. From paper walls to brick walls, the blueprint of control stayed the same. And to understand the next chapter, we need to step into Holmes's castle, where the architecture itself became a prison. In 1892, at the corner of 63rd and Wallace in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood, construction began on what would later become known as the Murder Castle. On the surface, it appeared to be a respectable 3-story hotel and retail space. To locals, it was the World's Fair Hotel, built just in time to welcome tourists for the 1893 Columbian Exposition. But behind its walls, Holmes orchestrated one of the most chilling architectural designs in history. The layout was deliberately confusing. Narrow hallways that led to nowhere, staircases that abruptly ended at brick walls, and hidden passages that only Holmes himself understood. Entire rooms were rigged with gas lines, controlled remotely from Holmes's office. Guests could be locked inside and suffocated without ever knowing why. Some chambers were completely soundproof, muffling screams to nothing more than whispers that died inside the walls. There were trapdoors leading to hidden chutes designed for one purpose: to drop bodies directly to the basement. And in that basement, Holmes had equipped himself like a man preparing for grisly industry: a dissection table, vats of quicklime and acid, and a furnace powerful enough to reduce flesh and bone to ash. This was not just a hotel. It was a factory of death. Holmes's charm ensured that no one questioned his motives. He hired and fired multiple contractors throughout the construction, each only seeing a fragment of the building's strange design. By the time anyone realized something was odd, they were gone. Even suppliers who delivered iron, wood, or gas fixtures rarely saw the full scope of what was being built. Holmes alone knew the master plan, and he guarded it fiercely. During the height of the World's Fair in 1893, tens of thousands of visitors flooded Chicago, searching for affordable accommodations. Many checked into Holmes's hotel, never to check out. Young women, often traveling alone in search of work or adventure, were his prime targets. Holmes would lure them with promises of jobs at his pharmacy or offers of lodging, only to lead them into his labyrinth. The murder castle was more than brick and mortar. It was an extension of Holmes's twisted mind. Every secret passage, every false door, every hidden chamber reflected his obsession with control, deception, and the thrill of playing God. The building itself became a weapon, and Holmes its calculating operator. By the time suspicions would finally begin to mount, countless souls had already vanished within its walls. Chicago had unknowingly become home to one of the most diabolical experiments in American history. Chapter 5. Legacy of a Killer. H.H. Holmes's downfall came as swiftly as his crimes had spread. After years of deception, fraud, and murder, he was finally caught. Not for killing, but for insurance scams gone wrong. In 1895, he stood trial in Philadelphia. But the truth unraveled quickly. The bodies, the schemes, the confessions, it all pointed to one man who had manipulated the law and the lives of everyone around him. Holmes was convicted and sentenced to death. On May 7, 1896, he was hanged before a crowd, reportedly meeting his fate with eerie calmness. Some accounts say he even smiled as the noose tightened, as if he knew that even death couldn't erase the legend he had crafted, and that legend lived on. Newspapers dubbed him America's first serial killer. Writers and historians linked him to the very spirit of Chicago's rise, a city bursting with ambition but shadowed by corruption and greed. His murder castle was torn down, yet the myths never crumbled. Stories spread that the building was cursed, that strange figures walked its halls long after Holmes was gone. Today, Holmes remains one of the most infamous names in criminal history. He represents more than just a man. He symbolizes what happens when intelligence and charm are twisted into something monstrous. His story is a chilling reminder that the brightest cities can cast the darkest shadows, and that sometimes the real horror isn't in the ghost stories, but in the man who walks among us unnoticed. Holmes wanted to be remembered, and in that, he succeeded. His name is etched into the dark archives of history, a warning from the past, and perhaps a reflection of how much evil a single man can hold behind a charming smile. Chapter 6. Demises in Shadow. By now, the threads between John Edward Robinson and H.H. Holmes have been laid bare. The modern slave master who hid behind contracts of control, and the 19th century architect of fear whose castle became a labyrinth of death. Both men relied on deception, on the manipulation of human trust, and on the illusion of safety. And yet, just as their lives ran in parallel, so too did their downfalls. Holmes, whose murder castle in Chicago became the stuff of nightmare, was eventually unmasked not just by murder but by fraud. Greed, the same impulse that allowed him to lure victims, led to sloppy mistakes. Arrested for insurance schemes and tied to multiple killings, Holmes faced the hangman's noose in 1896. His execution closed the chapter on one of America's earliest and most theatrical killers. Yet the legend of his castle lived on, larger than life, a Gothic warning about unchecked ambition and unchecked cruelty. Robinson's fall was quieter, but no less damning. He too was tripped up by greed and arrogance, his pattern finally cracked by investigators who refused to be fooled by contracts and computers. Convicted and sentenced to death, Robinson now waits in a cell, his crimes frozen in time, his fate held not by a hangman's rope, but by the machinery of modern justice. What lingers is not just the horror of their actions, but the eerie symmetry. Two men separated by a century, each cloaked in the guise of respectability, each undone by the very hubris that allowed them to kill. Their endings remind us that monsters do not last forever, but their shadows, those survive, etched into history's darkest corners.